for England during this afternoon. Hit and miss affairs, but where they do occur, they could cause some disruption. The highest temperatures likely over northern England, northern parts of the Midlands, where we could get up to 30 Celsius this afternoon. But as I said, that heat and humidity may well trigger further thundery showers during the afternoon and the evening, spreading further northwards. And we continue to have the risk of thundery showers coming up from France across the south. Overnight tonight. It will be another pretty warm night as well. Towns and cities staying in the mid-teens generally, so not a particularly comfortable night. It won't be as hot, certainly across northern England, the Midlands on Friday. Generally a bit more cloud around and a continued likelihood of heavy thundery showers drifting up. Still plenty of fine sunny weather, certainly across southern eastern parts of Scotland. For Northern Ireland, though, thicker cloud moving in with some outbreaks of rain, and that is a weather front which will start to switch things up for all of us come the weekend. As I say, still fairly warm in the sunshine, 24, 25 across the east, but not as hot as today. And that cold front, that band of rain in the west, spreads much cooler air across all parts of the UK. And then this low pressure system will dominate, bringing plenty of showers, certainly in the west, through the weekend.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's 9:30 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood. It's the 23rd of June 2022, which means it's 6 years since Britain voted to leave the European Union. Today, a programme dedicated to the consequences of that monumental vote. How's it turning out and how did we get there? All that after the headlines.
Good morning, it's 9:30. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Unions and train operators have resumed their talks to try and resolve the dispute over pay and conditions. Tens of thousands of rail workers have walked off the job for the second time this week, causing major travel disruption across the country. 1 in 5 trains are running today and they're mostly restricted to main lines. The government's already announced it's planning to change the law to allow agency staff to fill in for striking workers. The RMT's Assistant General Secretary John Leach told GB News the current offer needs to be improved.
I'm going in anticipation and hope that they're going to put a proper and decent offer on the table. But the thing is, let's talk about what is on the table. 2%, job insecurity, thousands of job cuts, ticket office closures, new contracts, fire and rehire. That's not on. They've got to have a complete reset. And more importantly, probably than anything else, the government have got to get behind the railway men and women of this country and resource and give the authority to the management to negotiate a fair deal.
Well, meanwhile, Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng says there is a fair deal on the table.
People who are striking, preventing kids from taking exams, preventing people from getting to work, should really actually look at what they're doing and actually, I think, come to some sort of reasonable arrangement. I don't think it's the case that the government has been unreasonable. I think the strikers are the ones who are being unreasonable.
The Prime Minister has hit back at critics of his plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda, describing their attitude as condescending. Boris Johnson's now arrived in the country's capital, Kigali, for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. He's due to hold talks with the Prince of Wales, who's also in Rwanda, after he reportedly described the policy as appalling. The Prime Minister is expected to announce new trade deals and investment initiatives during his trip. 2 British men who were captured by Russian forces in Ukraine are reportedly preparing to appeal their death sentences. Aidan Aslin, Sean Pinner and Moroccan national Brahim Sadoun were convicted by a Russian-backed court in the breakaway region of Donetsk. Sean Pinner's lawyer says if the appeal is dismissed, they'll request clemency. Meanwhile, the Foreign Secretary has accused Russia of weaponising hunger with its blockade of Ukrainian grain. In Turkey, Liz Truss said if issues aren't resolved within a month, the global impact will be huge. Liz Truss says the UK and Turkey will work together to get the grain out of Ukraine.
This is a moment for strength, for commitment and unity. The United Kingdom and Turkey are working closely together to mitigate the consequences of Russia's war against Ukraine. This has to start with getting Ukraine's grain out. We cannot and we will not rest until Ukraine prevails.
TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to the briefing with Tom.
Good morning, it's 9:30 and this is the briefing with me, Tom Harwood. 9:34, I should say. We're on your TV and your radio. Now, today marks 6 years since the people of the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union. It was the largest vote in the nation's history. No party, person or cause has ever received more votes than the idea of leaving the European Union. 17,410,742 of them. Now, I'd like to show you a little snippet of that moment that we within the Vote Leave campaign calculated it had happened. The moment that the office knew that Britain had voted to leave. Well, we'll show you that in a little moment. Little did we know that at that point it would take 3 prime ministers, 2 general elections and 4 long years to finally leave the political union. There were moments within those 4 years where all seemed lost. Political surprises and tugs of war over who steered the ship. We replaced a Prime Minister who said he couldn't deliver Brexit because he campaigned against it, with a Prime Minister who had also campaigned against it. Well, to what extent was the difficulty of those years, to what extent was the difficulty of getting through those years to do with who was in charge versus how it would have always been? Well, I'm delighted to be joined in the studio now by Steve Baker, of course, the rebel commander in Parliament of not just the Brexit years, because, of course, you were chairman of the European Research Group, not once, but twice, but also chairman of a less well-known group called Conservatives for Britain, which helped bring about that referendum in the first place.
That's right, Tom. Yes, after the 2015 general election, it was Dan Hannan and Matthew Elliott who challenged me to set up Conservatives for Britain, to bring Conservative MPs together to assess any renegotiation and campaign for Brexit. I did just that. We had quite a few front pages, but you know, compared to what happened subsequently, it was relatively small beer. But at the time, it felt very big. People were talking about a Corn Laws-style split in the Conservative Party. And I'm very happy to say that did not happen. Actually, it has to be said by those of us who voted down that deal 3 times, that it did, of course, result in us having an 80-seat majority and leaving properly. So a tumultuous time. I hope none of us ever have to go through it again. But, you know, in the end, we've left well and with a big majority. So it's quite something.
It's interesting looking at those years after 2016. It took 4 years to actually leave the European Union, twice as long as the Lisbon Treaty suggests that process should take. To what extent was that our fault? Was it the internal political differences and indeed lack of direction from the leadership of the United Kingdom?
Well, I'm really looking forward to seeing what historians say, but since you press me, I mean, I think that there was always going to be a problem if a major nation state like us decided to leave. The Lisbon Treaty was designed to let one of the East European accession states reverse its accession. When you talk to people who wrote the treaty, that's what they envisaged. They thought that, you know, an Eastern European state might not actually manage to make its way in, and therefore Article 50, by mutual consent, would take them back out. But they never envisaged that the United Kingdom or another major state would leave. So it wasn't really a suitable mechanism. And the way the EU insisted on a staged process, of course, was disastrous for the negotiations. The idea that you had to leave first and then negotiate a free trade agreement. So there's a load of structural flaws in the way the EU works, which I bet we would agree on. And that led to it partly being a disaster. But also the British establishment, of course, kicked back extremely hard against leaving. And that made us look like circus clowns, and that's much to be regretted.
I wonder to what extent everything changed as a result of the 2017 general election. We didn't agree to the sequencing of the talks, the Irish backstop even idea, until after Theresa May didn't quite win a majority in that election. Potentially with less political weakness at that stage, less scrabbling for a deal before that first Christmas of 2017, potentially things could have been very, very different.
Well, yes. I mean, to be put into a minority parliament was disastrous. You know, when you're negotiating, you need to be seen to know what you want and have the power to deliver it. And once Theresa May got herself into that position of minority government, suddenly it looked like she didn't have the power to deliver. And with so much division in Parliament, we did not present a united front. And of course, you know, our negotiating partners, therefore, could run rings round us. And, you know, we're right to, at times, you know, treat us badly because, of course, we didn't come together with the united resolve of the nation. One thing, though, you know, against expectations, we did get the EU Withdrawal Act through Parliament, the one that repealed the European Communities Act. I was the Bill Minister. I'm very proud that we did it. I think that at the time I was appointed a Bill Minister, I think we were expected to fail to do it. And I'm very pleased and proud that we did get it through in working shape. So, yeah, an amazing time. But yes, losing the majority was a big deal.
I suppose when we're looking at whether or not Brexit has worked, on one aspect, the question was, should Britain leave the European Union? Britain has left the European Union. Is everything else sort of non-consequential to that fundamental that many people will say, is Brexit a success? Well, just on the terms of whether or not the UK has left, we have. Do we need to assess anything beyond that?
Yeah, I think we do need to assess all of these things. But the reality is we took a major historic decision about the location of power in our country. We decided that we would, in a sense, restore our constitution and have our parliament and our courts as the ultimate arbiters of the law under which we live. And that was the purpose for me. I was pro-EU for many years until the Lisbon Treaty. But once I realised that they were willing to advance their project positively against the democratically expressed wishes of the electors, that was the moment at which I decided we should leave. So in the sense that we've relocated power in the UK, yes, it's been a success. But, you know, we've talked a bit about the difficulty of completing the process of leaving. But, of course, since then, the state has been completely consumed with COVID. Only just now are we starting to see Jacob Rees-Mogg and my close friend and colleague bringing forward measures to deal with EU law. So we've done plenty of trade deals. We'll do plenty more. Of course, it's a very important thing that we have the EU trade deal in place. And we should be optimistic about our capacity to liberalise trade, liberalise regulations, and get the growth that we need to go forward and succeed.
And of course, the biggest prize, I suppose, the trade deals are nice to have with other countries around the world, but they pale in comparison to the productivity gains and indeed economic gains that a new regulatory regime could deliver within the United Kingdom. Hold that thought, Steve Baker, because we're going to bring in Jonathan Portes from King's College London, who has been writing about exactly whether or not the position of Brexit has been a success. And Jonathan, you have 4 tests that you've developed on the economy, on fairness, on openness, and on control. How are things looking in your view?
So I think it is mixed. On the economy, Brexit has so far done, it has been very much as sort of mainstream economists like me predicted. That is to say, it's not been a catastrophe, but it has done significant economic damage and it will continue to do so. What I've described as a slow puncture, not a car crash. That's what I expected. That's broadly what we've got. On fairness, as yet, we haven't seen anything very much in the way of increased fairness. We've seen actually lagging behind regions have probably done slightly worse than others because of Brexit, and that's likely to continue. And we're also seeing rising pay inequality at the moment, actually. At the moment, the people whose pay is growing fastest are bankers. Bankers' bonuses are up. Pretty much everybody else's real pay is down.
Is it hard here, Jonathan Portes? Is it hard to distinguish between what the consequences, of course, of COVID have been and indeed absolutely. Of Brexit? It's almost a very irritating thing in this discussion to have left the European Union at just about the same time as our economy went into standstill for other reasons.
Absolutely. It is very difficult, and we just published a book today which does our best, but there is a lot of judgment is required to make these assessments. So we can be reasonably confident that Brexit has damaged the UK's trade, for example, because we have done significantly worse than basically any other advanced economy in trade terms, specifically since Brexit. That's not just a pandemic effect. That is a Brexit effect. But on other things like GDP, employment, it is very difficult to distinguish. And that brings me to the third test, openness, where I think the effect, as I said, the verdict is mixed. We are less open to trade, but we're actually doing very well on immigration. And here I have to admit, I was wrong. I didn't predict this. I did not expect that the government would actually implement a relatively liberal migration policy towards the rest of the world. Not only has the government done that, but it actually seems to be working reasonably well in increasing medium and high-skilled migration to the UK. So that, I think, is a clear, actually, things have gone pretty well. And then on control, there it's very much how you measure it. But in formal terms, as you and Steve were discussing, the UK has taken back control in the sense that there are a lot of things that will now be decided at Westminster rather than through the European Union process. So certainly in that narrow sense, we have taken back control, yes.
Well, Jonathan, hold that thought, because I'd like to bring back in Steve Baker, who was talking about how that control might be used and how that fourth point of yours might actually tie in with that first point of yours. Steve, if we use this control to move to a more deregulated economy, that could actually offset some of the obvious frictions that appear against a trading partner with whom we're diverging.
Well, yes, so I'm absolutely in favour of barrier-free trade, and it was always a disadvantage of leaving the customs union that there would be customs declarations, and freely admit that. The challenge is making sure that with the whole world we've got the freest possible trade and the least barriers to productivity and growth. I mean, everything we consume has got to be produced by someone, and that means we should be maximising production if we want to be well off. How do we maximise production? Well, that means division of labour, that means free trade. So with regulatory control, there was a great report called by the Task Force on Innovation, Growth and Regulatory Reform. They put out a wide range of recommendations on things like data, energy, biological sciences and so on. That report is available online, and you can see now the government's beginning to get on with implementing it.
Yes, really interesting there. Let's bring back in Jonathan Portes to just respond to that point. If the government does pursue this almost deregulatory agenda, the economy point on your list could turn around.
Well, diverging from the EU, and remember that doesn't mean deregulation necessarily, it may mean different regulation, could be positive or negative. I think we have to say that the economic evidence of EU membership was actually being part of the EU in regulatory terms was a net benefit. That doesn't mean that leaving it will be a net negative, but it does not follow that we will realise these benefits. And it's quite interesting. You may have seen the interview with the chief of the Competition and Markets Authority in the Financial Times today, who said, yes, we could do things better outside the EU in terms of digital regulation, but actually, at the moment, the government is making such a mess of things that we're actually falling behind and we're risking damaging ourselves through this process. So, theoretical benefits, yes, but there are also downsides. There are costs and benefits to divergence, and we will see whether we can actually realize these net benefits. I have to say, the fact that this government, regardless of what you think of it politically, doesn't seem to be, shall we say, the most competent, efficient government. It doesn't seem to have anything in the way of an economic strategy or coherent plan. Doesn't give you a huge amount of confidence.
Well, Jonathan Bortes and indeed Steve Baker, thank you so much, both of you, for joining me on this anniversary day. It's been a really fascinating conversation. We really appreciate your time. Well, let's bring in now a voice from the Labour Party. Baroness Jenny Chapman, the Labour peer and former shadow Brexit minister, was one of the architects of the push for a second referendum. Jenny Chapman, I want to explore a counterfactual with you here today, which is, had the Labour Party, instead of pushing for a second referendum in the end, pushed for a softer version of Brexit instead, might you have had more success?
I mean, we tried that. It was really interesting listening to Steve Baker talk about his recollections of that period, because I was working on the same issues at the same time, just sitting on the opposite side of the chamber to Steve. I think we did try every other option we could. We called for a customs union. We looked at all sorts of other ways of leaving the EU. In the end, there was absolute deadlock. And, I was not an architect of the second referendum. I can tell you that I resisted and resisted and resisted adopting that position. In the end, you had to have something.
Adopt that position, though. Is that something that you regret?
I mean, there's lots of things that I regret. I really do regret that we had to take 5 years to get to where we got to. I don't think the second referendum position was the right one. People thought that it was a rejection of democracy, which it wasn't. It was an attempt to break the deadlock, but there's no denying that that's how people saw it. In the end, we ended up with a general election, which served almost as a proxy for that second referendum. People by that stage, the public, were just so sick of it all. They wanted us to move on. They wanted a decision. We're now out of the EU. And what matters now is that we move forward. We get trade deals with other countries sorted out. But actually, the deal we've got with the EU isn't great. And we've got to get the holes in that fixed. We've got to resolve the issues in Northern Ireland, because we're not going to be able to take advantage of the freedoms that I accept we do have now, unless we resolve these outstanding issues. We've seen today scientists wanting to be part of Horizon, which has already been agreed. That's all being held up because of Northern Ireland. We're not going to get a deal with the Americans until we deal with the protocol issues. So, if only we'd left with a plan, I think is where I am at the moment.
It's interesting, because I think most reasonable people can see that there are some advantages to the European Union, of course. There are some advantages to leaving the European Union, of course. I suppose it's where you fall on that dichotomy. But the Labour Party now has a slogan, "Make Brexit Work." And I just wonder, what is the big push in order to do that? Is it just trying to engage with more negotiation?
No, I mean, there are outstanding issues. And if you want to make Brexit work, which everybody does now, it's no good wishing we hadn't left. We have left. So you've got to move on. You've got to make this work. So make Brexit work is just a statement of reality. But there are outstanding problems. Our exporters are having difficulty. Our manufacturers are having difficulty. Talk to anybody in the food and drink industry. They're having difficulty. Look at what's happening at the borders. But we don't think that the solution to this is to go backwards or to join the single market or any of that stuff. The solution to this is to repair our relationship with the EU because there's a massive trust problem, which Boris Johnson has got us into because of Northern Ireland. Get that sorted out, fix the holes in the deal, and I think we can, move forward with confidence and success, and we can use the freedoms that we've got on procurement, say, to do the make, buy, sell British. We think that there are opportunities that are not being taken because the government is just chasing its tail and looking for arguments rather than actually dealing with the problems that it's got.
Well, Baroness Jenny Chapman, thank you so much for joining us this morning on The Briefing. It's been a really interesting chat there and to look back over those years. Well, finally on the programme today is GB News presenter, former leader of the Brexit Party as well, Nigel Farage, someone who, without whom, I think it's fair to say the referendum would never have come about in the first place. Nigel, sitting here today, 6 years on from that vote, how do you think it has all gone?
The first thing to say, Tom, of course, after the pandemic and lockdown, I've lost any sense of what 6 years is. It could be 6 months, it could be 60 years, I just don't know. The big achievement was to get that vote in the face of global opposition from every global leader, the American president visiting, the trade unions, big business. It was a hell of an achievement. People rebelled against the establishment. They then, of course, had to win it again, as Jenny Chapman and others did their best to frustrate the process. So the fact we've left, and that people now say this is not going to be reversed, that is extraordinary victory. And you talk to MPs, Tom, than I do. Parliament is busier than it's ever been because we now are making our own law. We have to vote on it. They've got to earn their money. And I rather like that. That's good. The problem is, every morning I go through my emails, website, and the level of frustration that Brexit's not been completed, haven't got a proper Brexit, it's beginning to grow to something quite close to disillusion. And unless Boris Johnson is really, really careful, he'll find a lot of those people voting Conservative to get Brexit done, just won't bother next time round. So we do need some rapid action on 2 or 3 points. I think the first is to stop civil service obstructionism. Ian Duncan-Smith and others, the Centre for Brexit Policy, produced their report this week talking on this issue. Jacob, don't just put notes round saying, please come back to the office. Start sacking a few people if they're not getting on with the job. The second thing I think we've got to do is cut VAT, starting with fuel. It was a promise that every Leave campaigner made. I've no idea why Rishi hasn't delivered it. And by doing that, you actually give every household an achievable gain from Brexit. They can see it in their pocket. It makes sense. And the third one's the big one. It's Brexit 2.0. It's the ECHR. And I believe that if Johnson, after that extraordinary ruling, that insult to our sovereignty a couple of weeks ago, says in the next election manifesto, we're going to leave ECHR, we're going to be sovereign over our borders, it'll be like the Brexit battle refought all over again, and it might just win him the next general election. There's lots of other things to talk about. There's fishing, there's Northern Ireland, but at the moment, a general feeling that the government are not gripping the opportunities. We're paying the costs, not taking the benefits.
It's interesting acknowledging, of course, that there are some costs. There's costs to any change. There were some things that the European Union made easier. But also, whilst people on the Leave side readily admit and accept that, I suppose people on the other side have to accept that the control that is gained over the economy can provide enormous benefits. And I suppose what we're seeing with Jacob Rees-Mogg this week is showing that it is actually a process rather than an event in terms of changing our regulatory structure and delivering us a way back to growth. Just in our final 30 seconds, Nigel Farage, Are you optimistic or pessimistic that we now have the opportunity to reform our domestic economy and get us back to growth?
All we have to do is have the political will, the leadership, the vision, the desire, the kinds of things the Conservatives had back in the 1980s, but appear sadly lacking from this current cabinet. We need some fresh ideas, some fresh thinking, and some real leadership. It's Boris Johnson's big opportunity. He can still save himself, but we need radical, positive ideas for the future. We've got to make people realise that Brexit's been done and been done properly.
Well, Nigel, thank you so much for joining me on this special anniversary edition. It's been a delight to have you and indeed the other guests as well. That's it today for the briefing. Coming up, it's to the point, but first is the weather.
Good morning, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Plenty more very warm, hazy sunshine for many of us today, but we are going to start to see more and more thunderstorms breaking out, and there is a Met Office warning in place. Weather fronts close to the far north of Scotland, but actually through today pushing away. It's this one spreading up from the south that's bringing the risk of thunderstorms, and some big downpours are likely in places by this afternoon. Many of us starting with plenty of blue sky and sunshine, but clouding over across the southeast, sunshine turning increasingly hazy, and as the temperatures build, so we are more likely to see thunderstorms breaking out. Very hit and miss, not everywhere seeing them, far from it, but there is the potential for thunderstorms, certainly across the Midlands, East Wales, southern parts of England during this afternoon. Hit and miss affairs, but where they do occur, they could cause some disruption. The highest temperatures likely over northern England, northern parts of the Midlands, where we could get up to 30 Celsius this afternoon. But as I said, that heat and humidity may well trigger further thundery showers during the afternoon and the evening, spreading further northwards. And we continue to have the risk of thundery showers coming up from France across the south. Overnight tonight. It will be another pretty warm night as well. Towns and cities staying in the mid-teens generally, so not a particularly comfortable night. It won't be as hot, certainly across northern England, the Midlands on Friday. Generally a bit more cloud around and a continued likelihood of heavy thundery showers drifting up. Still plenty of fine sunny weather, certainly across southern eastern parts of Scotland. For Northern Ireland, though, thicker cloud moving in with some outbreaks of rain, and that is a weather front which will start to switch things up for all of us come the weekend. As I say, still fairly warm in the sunshine, 24, 25 across the east, but not as hot as today. And that cold front, that band of rain in the west, spreads much cooler air across all parts of the UK. And then this low pressure system will dominate, bringing plenty of showers, certainly in the west, through the weekend.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over